7%.
Yeah. And that's the part.
And that's now that's when things start to get really tricky, because now all of a sudden I'm going, okay, now I'm having a lot of problems with my compound interest on my debts.
And just thinking that people think that housing is expensive now. Can you imagine, go back to the 80s when the interest rates were in the 14 to 20% range and try and buy?
That was the prime rate.
Yeah. So try and buy a house at today's prices at $750,000.
Listen, if you have the money, I tell people, if you have the money, I'd buy. Now.
Oh, absolutely. But the problem is, like in my case, I could sell my farm for many more times than I bought it. My problem is, if I want to buy a property of the same or equal value, where am I going to go?
Well, this is So it's the illusion.
Yeah.
Of it's nice to say, well, the housing prices are going up, so my equity goes up. But if you sell and you want to move somewhere else, well, the house you're buying is going up too, right?
That's right.
So it's a lot of this is illusion. But the bottom line is, okay, you want price stability and you want the value of your money to be stable. And the real reason for that, Nick, okay, when push comes to shove, is because you're making today X number of dollars. Let's say you make $50,000 a year today, and your wages are not going up, but the price of everything else is going up.
Right.
So the ability, the buying power of your dollar is actually going down. You can't buy as much with your dollars. Now, if you're a worker, you can negotiate for higher wages. But what if you're on a fixed income, like a pension?
Mm-hmm.
What if you're a senior and you don't have anything but your pension? Okay. Now you're in trouble.
See, this is part of what...
Because you're especially as you're living longer.
Especially, this is part of what makes me nervous about a UBI, about a universal benefit, income benefit, or whatever the acronym stands for, where everybody gets a base salary. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say that's not enough, and they're going to have to increase it. And it's going to start an upward spiral that'll never quit. Minimum wage is a classic example. When I was in high school, minimum wage was $3.25 an hour. And there was no student minimum wage. That was it, $3.25 an hour. It's now $15 or 14 and change. That's a mighty big climb. And somebody before long is going to say, well, that's not a living wage. Never mind the argument it's not supposed to be a living wage. It's supposed to be an entry-level wage. You're not supposed to raise a family on that money. Never set that aside. It's the cost to the taxpayer in the long run. That's in this budget, by the way. I think it's 87 billion to 109 billion a year to fund a UBI, depending on how you do it. Okay, so what happens where's the incentive other than inflation? Inflation might be the only incentive people have to get out and work on top of UBI. Is CRA going to claw the UBI back like they do with a lot of other benefits if you start to make over a certain amount of money a year?
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, so then a lot of people are going to just stay under that because they know that money's going to come in every month, and if they want to sit on their butt for a month or two, they can.
But clawing back doesn't work that way, Dick. Clawing back works that they don't claw. I mean, we use the term claw back, but the idea is, and I'm not defending the UBI idea. I'm just saying
explaining
that how
things.
The principle it would work is that you don't. It's not 100%. Like if the level that if they do UBI and they set a level, let's say it's $20,000 a year. Okay, so you go out and you earn $20,000 a year. So now your total income, gross income, is $40,000, right? So whatever it is, once they start clawing it back, they would only take a portion. They wouldn't take the full amount. So for every $1,000, I might claw back $500. So you're still making more money by going out and working, right?
Yeah, in theory.
Well, no, but in practice you are. It's
well,
as long as the tax rates don't interfere with that.
Well,
number one, and of course, are you doing it? Are you working under the table? that's a different question altogether, right? Is there a way that
Well,
you can
I don't
hide
know
this
if it's
stuff?
an intended consequence, Joseph, but I think that they're one of the side effects of this whole COVID paying cashless and online is to suppress the black market, the under the table cottage economy, because let's face it, they lose a lot of money to taxation every year because things are so expensive that if somebody were to sell somebody else a dozen eggs or maybe a piece of machinery or like a snowblower or something like that, look, give me a couple $100 for it, cash, and we'll just let it go at that. You know, instead of saying, well, it's $200 plus 13%, then submitting the 13% the way that you're supposed to.
Right. Buying online it's harder to cheat when you're buying online.
That's what I'm driving at.
I totally understand that.
So I don't know that they intended that to happen, but I think it's a consequence of that.
Another thing, Nick, that's in this budget, I think, as I'm watching the clock, that I think we have to just touch base on, and that is the minimum wage. This budget also talks about a $15 minimum wage for workers in federally regulated industries or businesses. So, what is the definition of federally regulated? That's a question that's going to have to be answered. But again, the idea that you can mandate from Ottawa a minimum wage that applies across the country simply doesn't take into account the immense diversity that you have in this country. Now, I'm sympathetic. I don't agree with mandated minimum wages, but I'm sympathetic to them. But surely if you're going to have mandated minimum wages, it makes more sense to have minimum wage mandates determined at the local level.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Because, $15 an hour, as you say, is $15 an hour, frankly, is not a living wage if you're living and working in Toronto.
No.
But it's way more than a minimum wage, or than a living wage, probably, if you're living and working in Bancroft, Ontario.
Right.
And sorry for you guys living
in Bancroft,
Ontario,
or Killaloe, or Whitney, or you
if I'm
pick your town.
misrepresenting the economic situation there. It's not that it's depressed; it's that housing is less expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So you probably your cost of living is probably a lot less, and so you can get by with less money. So. But I'm just not. I'm a very big believer in the free market when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't believe that the government should be mandating minimum wages. But if you're going to do it, then it should be something that you do more at the local level.
Absolutely. Leave the municipalities in charge of setting the minimum wage. And I've heard somebody locally in where I live say the same thing, because $15 an hour in Killaloe is a big difference from $15 an hour in Ottawa. I mean, it used to be that was a decent day's wage in Killaloe. Now you've got people walking into different sawmills right off the street making $14.70, and the guy who's been there for 30 years is making $15. He goes to his boss and, why am I only making 30 cents more than this young kid with no experience? I want to raise. Yeah. Well, that just drives the cost up, or drives people into unemployment because the employer doesn't only has a certain size envelope of cash for salaries.
Well, that of course is another problem. Those are two other problems with minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't take into account the reality of every business. It's the funny thing is that the big corporations, okay. The big box stores, for instance, Walmart and that, all right, like they pay more than minimum wage. They're not paying people $5 an hour. So who is it that you're going to be hurting by mandating a $15 an hour minimum wage? Now, they're not talking about a universal mandate. They're just talking about federally regulated industries and businesses. So the mom and pop corner store, Kim's Corner Store, whatever that show is called, okay, they're not affected by it, by this particular mandate. But if the province of Ontario says, well, we're going to have a $15 minimum wage across the board, well, it's the small mom and pop operations that are going to be hurt, because they're the ones with the limited amount of cash to be able to pay out labor, okay? Because you can't tell a person coming into the store, well, I'm sorry, but we have to start charging you $3.50 for that can of pop because we have to be able to afford to pay this person. So what do? You lay people off, because in the final analysis, the amount of money that's controlled that in a business, the amount of money that a business has to pay out is controlled by the people who come in and do business with you.
Right.
And if you start raising your prices, you're going to
lose customers.
You're going to lose customers.
So your discretionary spending is discretionary upon the people who come through the door.
Exactly. Okay, let's take a break, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to come back in a few minutes. If you're listening to the live show, we have a few other things, really interesting things to talk about. This was a more general discussion, but we have a couple of interesting
items on the budget,
things that we want to talk about with respect to the budget. So if you're listening live, stay put. If you're listening to the podcast, join us again tomorrow morning here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.